What are the numbers actually telling us?
The truth is, the statisticians don't actually know right now, because they say that these high numbers are an occurrence of some pretty big world events that are going on, they just can't predict. So, net migration has been rising pretty steadily for the last 30 years, barring, of course, a bit of COVID in the middle, and now it's hit about 504,000. It's the biggest in history, and I mean, it's about the size of the population of Liverpool. So it is big. But to understand why the trends are pretty hard to spot, it's good to sort of look at the why and the when. So first off, the majority of the migration is down to students. It's been rising, pretty big rise. It's now hit 277,000. But that's since COVID. So there was a lot of pent-up demand, people waiting to get here who couldn't. Then we've got a number of people coming here to work. That's been rising again, but it's hit 150,000. And then we've got this third group that the ONS call other. This includes people coming from Ukraine, people coming from Hong Kong, people coming from Afghanistan. So look, when you look at these big one-off geopolitical events, war, regime change, and you couple it with COVID, the wonks are saying we just can't tell actually long-term what's happening.
Well, if no one's really sure how the numbers are going to change in the medium-long term, can we say any more about where people are coming from?
Oh yeah, this is the spot where we really can pin down some trends. So net migration from outside the EU is rising, and it's rising fast. Net migration from within the EU isn't just falling, it's actually negative. More EU citizens are leaving the UK than coming here. And this is tricky politically. Look, this is the 2019 Tory manifesto. They kept away from, get Brexit done. That was the title there. Overall numbers will come down. They're not. Today, the Home Secretary said, the public rightly expect us to control our borders, and we remain committed to reducing migration over time in line with our manifesto commitment. It's putting pressure on public services. She adds, my priority remains tackling the rising dangerous and illegal crossings and stopping abuse of our system. Look, interestingly, the Home Office put out another set of numbers today on the number of people coming over by those small boat crossings. It's about 44,500. That's less than 1/10 of the overall number. Truth is, what's rising this are people coming here legally and people coming from outside the EU.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, joining me now to discuss this further are Sundar Katwala from the migration policy think tank British Future, and David Goodhart, who's a journalist and commentator who's written about immigration. David Goodhart first. When you look at those figures and those graphs, really quite astonishing, puts to bed the idea that Brexit allowed the UK to take control of its borders, right?
No, well, funnily enough, we have taken control of our borders. I think the government have actually got, despite this sort of upward blip, have got the balance about right. Because don't forget, almost all of the non-refugee migration in those figures is temporary. So the numbers will...
Because they're students.
They're students, or they're people on student visas or work visas, and those numbers will come down. I mean, as your reporter said, I mean, a lot of this is one-off. It's to do with the fact that we're an open society. We have all these historical connections, hence the Hong Kong numbers, the Afghanistan numbers, you might even say the Ukraine numbers. These are all things we have chosen to do.
Right. So we can start seeing Conservative politicians selling immigration to the public, then?
No, because the numbers are too high. I mean, they are unsustainably high at the moment. They will come down. But, they put a huge strain on public services. We're a small, pretty crowded island. And it's disappointing and embarrassing for the government that the numbers are so high at the moment.
Unsustainably high, or actually propping up the economy?
Exceptionally high, and the 500,000 number, because 250,000 Ukrainians came in 6 months. The first half of that is here. Now, nobody could say that was a government foisting immigration on an unwilling public. That was a public having to individually admit the Ukrainians in and telling the government they wanted to do it. That was an example of very popular immigration. What the Chancellor said in his budget is he thinks it will come down to pre-pandemic levels. He's going to go back to the 2019 level, not below it. And neither Rishi Sunak nor Keir Starmer, while they say they want to reduce it, actually have got plans that would cut the net migration numbers. Free movement has gone, but these are the policy choices of the government to increase student immigration, to have a Hong Kong visa, which everybody seems to agree with, and to have visas when the NHS wants them. And those things are staying.
But the UK is economically dependent on high immigration and keeping immigration high. But politicians aren't sort of championing that cause, are they?
I think you can say the public are now more pro-immigration than the politicians, and perhaps, you know, the Labour Party, quite traumatised by the Brexit defeat, the referendum defeat, might not believe that. The Conservatives still have a vote that would like the numbers to be reduced, but which doesn't want to reduce doctors or nurses or engineers or indeed fruit pickers. So the public are also caught between, you know, I don't want it to be too high, but I want the migrants that are making a contribution.
But yeah, I mean, our economy has become too dependent on high immigration. You know, we're not paying people properly in those shortage areas. We're not training people enough. We have the lowest levels of training and investment in automation of anywhere in Europe.
But we've got labour shortages at the moment. It would help to have a few EU migrants who were filling those jobs before, wouldn't it?
No, I think on the contrary, this shows we've had 500,000 net immigration in the last year, and what is happening to economic growth. The idea that we need lots of immigration to drive economic growth is completely disproved by these figures. And I mean, the idea of further liberalisation, which has been canvassed recently, is completely knocked on the head now.
We actually need a different kind of debate. We've actually got quite a lot of consensus on who should get a visa to work and study. There might be some debate about shortage lists. We have no debate about what happens after you get a visa. Actually, what's the integration programme with Hong Kong? Is that's going quite well? How does that work with other groups? You know, if Ukrainians are staying, are they getting into work? Are they using their skills? How can we get refugee employment up? So we should have more debate, I think, about integration and citizenship. And the immigration numbers are going to stay at around the levels they've been for 20 years.
You could also reduce anxiety a lot. I mean, if we took students, I know this is controversial, but if you did take students out of the figures, which a lot of countries do, America does, for example, that would, at a stroke, reduce. I mean,
is there a good argument for that?
Well, student immigration is a quite relatively popular kind. Students tend, keep themselves to themselves. They come in, and the vast majority go out. And also, if you look at the permanent residence number, is running at about 100,000 a year. I mean, that is what really worries people in the long run, is how quickly the country is changing.
Come back to that, but could you take students out of the numbers, do you think?
Most of the public are really surprised they're in the numbers. And so then they think, oh, are you fiddling the figures? Because they haven't got international students, they're coming for more than a year, so they're there. So if you said it's 500,000 student visas, 500,000 other visas, that would chime with common sense instincts more. But you haven't got a net migration target. Boris Johnson ditched the net migration target and decided to have more open non-EU policies than Theresa May had. So this is actually control, not meaning reduction, has been the policy of the government. They just made an incompatible promise that policies that would liberalise immigration would also reduce it, and clearly you can't do both.
Yeah, I mean, it will come down. It's got to come down, and employers have got to pull their finger out and start training people. And interestingly enough, the areas of the economy that have been complaining most in the last few weeks about labour shortages, so construction, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, only 4,000 people came in on work visas in the last quarter. 4,000 in all of those areas combined. So they're simply not using the new system. It is there for them. I mean, we did have, 150,000 people came in on work visas in the last year. It's not nothing, but it was, as part of this overall shocking 500,000 figure, it's quite a small proportion.
Sunna?
I think business has got a case to say, there are some areas that don't meet the skills list. What, for example, Keir Starmer was saying is there had to be a deal. If you've got shortages, then you need a plan to have domestic skills. I think that's a popular skills argument. It doesn't really make sense to make it as an anti-immigration argument, because you're not actually planning to reduce immigration. You're cutting out the immigration that has gone now with the new point system.
That's one of the ironies at the moment, is that we actually, Keir Starmer was ineffectively kind of falling in with the government's balance of restricting low-skill immigration.
Because he spotted a political trap.
Well, there's a big, heated, polarised argument about asylum and refugees, and we need to sort that out and get a more orderly and more humane system. There's a consensus on visa immigration. It's just that it's going to be high.
David Goodhart, Sundar Katwala, thank you very much for joining us.